Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. And as you can see, I am joined by guest Alex Barnes-Ross. Now, Alex came to me a few weeks ago, and we have had correspondence because he is a former Scientologist and a former staff member of the Church of Scientology of London. Alex hails from the United Kingdom. And we're going to get into his backstory and all the deets and information about his story. It is quite interesting because, and the reason I was kind of interested in putting him on a microphone and having this conversation with all of y'all is because he had some unique experiences that we haven't covered in a lot of detail on this channel, having to do with getting on staff or getting involved in an org and then getting kicked out. And of course, we've talked about disconnection and getting declared SP, but there's some little bits and pieces to how this stuff works that are demonstrated in this story that I think you're going to find kind of interesting, as well, of course, as some of the other experiences Alex had as a staff member and as a Scientologist, because he got in, got kicked out, got back in, and then got out again. So how does that kind of thing happen? Well, Alex, welcome to my show. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of this.
And thank you for having me. I think I wanted to start just with a thanks, for everything that you do. And there's, more and more content coming out there about Scientology from insiders, and, your channel particularly for my recovery process has been really helpful. Just hearing lots of people's stories that might not be front page news, but having been someone that was inside it, just hearing that you're not alone and other people have gone through similar things, it's that in itself is really helpful. So firstly, thank you. But I think I agree. My story is interesting because I don't come from a Scientology background. I'm not a second generation Scientologist or anything like that. I grew up in a kind of secular family. My parents aren't religious. I did go to a church school, but only because it had good results and it was local rather than it being a religious thing. So I come from a pretty non-religious background. So how I ended up getting into Scientology, and as you say, joining staff, being kicked out, joining again, being kicked out again, and all at a very young age, it's an interesting one. So I'm excited to share my story publicly for the first time.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I'm very happy to give you a platform here. And I think that this will be an interesting story for everybody. And of course, you're very welcome for all the content I put out. That is the whole point of this channel, is to help people. One of the major, there's sort of three purposes for this channel, which is my own recovery and the documenting of that, the education of the public at large about coercive control and destructive cults, and to help people recover. And any bit I can do to assist that, I'm very, it just gives me warm, fuzzy feelings when people tell me that the work is doing what it's supposed to. So thank you for that.
I think that's why I kind of want to speak up as well. My journey in Scientology was sort of 2011 to 2014-ish, give or take. So we're quite a few years on from that now. And I haven't actually really spoken about my story to many people anyway. Like, this is certainly the first time I've spoken about my story in any great detail with anybody. And so I think the reason I'm doing it is just because I think there's lots of stories and people talking about Scientology in the Sea Org in the States. And there's not so much about London and the UK Scientology side of things. There's bits and bobs, but there's not too much. And secondly, the journey of someone who didn't grow up in Scientology, that joined and kind of got recruited into it. And that's one of the reasons I want to share this story, is because there's not too much content out there about the kind of regular average person that's just been sucked in and spat out.
Exactly. In fact, it's interesting because the very first interview I ever did with an ex-Scientologist was a friend here in Colorado, he's not here now, but he was from London. He was staff in the Church of Scientology of London, but he was second gen. He was raised in it. He did go to Greenfields, the Scientology school. He did hang around St. Hill. Your story, vastly different from his. And yet, and all the time from him to now, I've never had a chance to interview anybody from the UK who had the UK experience, I should say. I've interviewed, John Sweeney and some other people, but this will be interesting. This will be very interesting. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Let's go to the beginning. Let's just walk through it. How did Scientology come into your life?
I think my story in itself starts off a bit strange, because the first sort of instance of knowledge I had of Scientology was actually the BBC Panorama documentary that John Sweeney and so on did about how bad Scientology is. And I watched that as a teenager. I would have been sort of 14, 15 or something at that age, and kind of watched it. And I thought, wow, this is, there's a lot of bad stuff being said about this organization. And I'm sort of quite a critical thinker and open-minded about a lot of things. And my mind went to a place of going, well, there's a lot of journalism that is biased about lots of subjects. And I want to know whether it is actually as bad and as destructive as these guys are saying, or whether it is, actually all right. And it's just they've annoyed a couple of journalists, right? And they've just giving it bad press. So I actually just wanted to find out more, not because it piqued my interest on a spiritual journey point of view or anything, but just because, it was a controversial thing and I wanted to know more about it. And so, I did a personality test and I went into the London org for when they review the personality test and give you your graph that shows you the areas of your life you can improve. And normally when people join Scientology, the process is sort of trying to find someone's what they call a ruin, right? They find what it is that's ruining your life and then give Scientology as a solution. And I didn't really have one of those because I was a teenager. I was still growing up. I was still in school. I was kind of generally okay. I was quite a smart kid. I did loads of classes at school and, did 17 GCSEs, which is the UK kind of school sort of program, if you like. And so I didn't really have anything that was going wrong. So there wasn't Scientology gave me the solution, but it was just more a nice place to be. The people were really friendly. And there's a saying in Scientology that it's not there to fix people, it's to make the able more able. And I feel like that's what sort of drew me in, was more, these are life improvement courses, practical tips, things you can apply in your life to just make you better at communicating or whatever it is that you're working on. So they never really found a ruin, but I kind of got swept up in the culture of everyone having a united cause to save the planet and clear the world. And, I think it was that aspect of the community driven thing that really sucked me in. And so, I was still in school at the time.
Okay.
Did a couple of courses in the public course room, and before long was ended up on staff pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I understand that. It only took 2 years for me to get on staff. It was a lot shorter for you. Let me ask you. Let me backtrack for a second because I'm genuinely curious. What was your reaction to John Sweeney? He was BBC reporter at the time, and he's the one who did that expose on Panorama about Scientology. And he's famously known for blowing his stack, for completely losing it on Tommy Davis, the church spokesperson, who had been, we came to learn, had been needling John Sweeney with bigot. He was calling him bigot for days. Just trigger, trying to provoke exactly the reaction he got on camera from John, where John just blew up at him and started yelling at him. And they, of course, used that as the highlight reel for why the Panorama is a scummy, horrible organization that shouldn't be listened to, because look at this reporter losing his mind. What were your thoughts watching that for the first time?
I mean, it's a long time ago, but I think from memory, I probably looked at it as a kind of, look, these two guys have had a disagreement. They're obviously at each other's throats. And I don't think I put two and two together in my head that the reason Tommy Davis, as the Scientology spokesperson, is doing this is because he wants to create a reaction, etc. I thought of it more I didn't really realize or think that maybe that was actually what the church teaches and what they believes and how they operate. I think I looked at it as more, look, these two butted heads and they're both trying to do whatever they can to get each other to react on camera and make the other one look bad.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I thought, well, I want to go in and find out, is it actually that is what they do, or was it just, a bad story that happened, a bad disagreement that ended up happening to be captured on film, and unfortunately looked bad for both of them. So I think it was, just that general kind of genuine, inquisitiveness to try and find out more. And there's also the aspect of the US being a lot more extreme in terms of the stories you hear coming out of Scientology. There wasn't much focus on what happens in London. There was a little bit, but there's not too much out. And I was just kind of wondering, is it just that this church is a bit corrupt in the US and they do things differently and it's all a bit wrong there, but actually the principles work, and in the UK it's a bit more tame? And I went in with a really open mind, but aware that all these bad things have been said about this church. So I was kind of very wary from the get-go.
Okay. Very interesting. I'm fascinated by it because it's good to get, these, for me, it's really good to see the breadth of experience with this and how reasonable people can be, or, the objective and sort of, well, I'm not going to judge just based on one story or one thing I see or one thing I hear. And all good points. There's no fault finding with you here at all. I'm genuinely curious about what your viewpoint and attitude was going in. It's not dissimilar to how people are looking at right now the Danny Masterson case, and they go, well, there's these women, but they could be lying, and there's all these things that don't really make sense in their story. So no, the guy's probably innocent. How is he even being charged? And those of us who know how Scientology operates and know how Scientologists operate are looking at that case through a very different lens. And so it's quite interesting to have to remind myself constantly, knowing everything I know, that, just because you see a couple bad things about something doesn't mean you immediately form the correct conclusion about it, and it helps me to try to figure out ways to communicate about this more, I don't want to say even-handedly, because I think I'm already doing that, but better, so that it gets across to people that we are not talking about an organization in the Church of Scientology that is just like the Catholics or just like the Christian. It's just another belief system. That is not what this group is. And we'll go into all the details as to why in your story, but it's so funny how they get so much benefit of the doubt from people, even after all this time and all this documentation of the abuses.
I think also that part of what they teach you in Scientology is, they have an answer for everything. Me having heard all, they call it black PR, all these bad stories about Scientology, I didn't go in and just not ask them these questions. I didn't go in and say, oh, what's this Xenu story? Do you believe in aliens? And they go, no, we don't. And I kind of went, okay, great. And not ask, I wanted to know, and I was questioning everything. I went in with a real open and critical mind.
Yep.
And I think, they do just have an answer for everything to get you to the point where you're satisfied that, what they're saying, or it was a misinterpretation, or it's misunderstood, or it's kind of like that, but not quite. And, there's a bit of ambiguity in their answers, but it's kind of like a politician. Politicians never actually answer the question straight up. It's the same thing. They're really good with the way they communicate the message they want to make you feel satisfied that you don't need to ask any more questions. And that's where I got to. And, the Xenu story is one really interesting one. The person who I'm going to try not to mention too many names because I don't know who is still in and who isn't, and what I don't want to cause any repercussions for anyone who is still in Scientology. But the person who I first kind of was speaking to that did, after I did my personality test, gave me the results and routed me onto course and stuff. She's an older lady. She was probably in Scientology in the 80s, and her children and grandchildren are in Scientology as well. So she's an old timer. She knows everything. She's OT8. So I thought she was a really good person to be the first person to speak to in Scientology. And I outright asked her, I said, what's this Xenu story? Like, do you guys believe in aliens? Because I don't judge you. Like, if you do, actually, I think that's quite cool. I was a teenager. I was like, do you believe in aliens? Because, I don't know if I believe in aliens or not, but if you're saying you're a religion that does, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I can get on board with that. And she was like, no, obviously, we don't believe in aliens. And the response that she gave, which is the same response I would give when I was working in Scientology, was L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer, and he did a lot of that writing to then fund his research into the mind, into the brain, and spirituality. And I've never heard anyone else say this before. So it's interesting that this is the London story, if you like. But one of the things that is said is that people misunderstand that differentiation between his science fiction writing and his spiritual beliefs and mental, mind work. And people think that we believe in his science fiction work, which obviously we don't. They're two separate things. So no, we don't believe in aliens. He wrote science fiction to fund his research into the mind.
How interesting. It's such a bald-faced lie that it just sits there on the table and you just go, oh, well, you're saying that with such certainty and aplomb. I mean, it must be true. Oh, these silly people are just confusing these two things. It's a great line to somebody who doesn't really know. Just because that came up and it's the first time I'm kind of hearing it put so clearly like that. Later on, as you read and learned and heard lectures from Hubbard about, were you ever exposed in your time in Scientology to the space opera histories that Hubbard would go into in his lectures?
No, I didn't make it up to OT3. I didn't make it to clear. I was kind of only very entry level. I didn't even make it onto my Purif because I was almost immediately routed onto staff. And when you're on staff, you're, doing the staff training and did staff status 0, 1, and 2. And, there's a lot of objectives and auditing and stuff that I did that wasn't bridge auditing and bridge work. But so it's not something I ever had sort of exposure to, but it's something that I would lie about as a Scientologist. I worked in Div 6, which is the public facing division of Scientology. So, I'm kind of skipping a bit, but I was the director of public book sales eventually. So I was in charge of all the sales of books to public who don't know anything about Scientology. So I was face to face with people every day that aren't Scientologists, and I would get these questions day in, day out. And one of the things when people brought up the Xenu story, one of the things I would say is, well, look, I work for the church. I've been in the church for, a long time. If that was the case, I would know, and I've not seen anything to say that we believe in aliens. And as someone that works for the church, wouldn't you think that I would know that if that was the case? And people would kind of go, oh, yeah, that does kind of make sense. I'm like, yeah, so no, we don't believe in the whole Xenu thing that's made up. I've got access to all of the books and everything because I work for the church. I would know.
That is so
But in the back of my
funny.
mind, I think there's probably some doubt. Probably part of me was like, well, look, obviously I know I have access to all of the books and everything in the library and, etc. But part of me was kind of thinking probably, look, if that is the story, Xenu and all of that, well, it probably sounds a bit nuts, but maybe there's something I don't understand and I'll find out that will make sense. And, I just didn't question it or think about it too much and didn't judge it because...
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's interesting also because what I'm thinking about right now as we're talking about this is how Scientology over the decades morphs its public image to match with cultural values and norms, right? Where right now, for example, they heavily downplay their anti-LGBT rhetoric. They downplay the space opera. No, that's not a thing here. In fact, they downplay it so much that they're blatantly lying about it, where it's like, oh, no, that's not even part of our dogma, when in fact it's a tremendous part of the dogma. But what I find interesting there is how that's another morphing of their public image and public facing statements to match the culture. Because in the 60s, spirituality and alien stuff was all over their frontline discussions, right? Oh yeah, come in here. We're going to teach you all about the UFOs and the aliens and the spirits. And people were like, "What?" And coming in on that. So I just find it something worth commenting on. The changing PR statements that Scientology uses to bring people in, and really play on that reasonability, that automatic thinking on the part of, say, you as a new staff member, new Scientologist. You'd only really been around for a year at most, and you're saying with certainty, oh, no, this stuff isn't here. And yet you haven't read even 100th of the material yet to be able to say that, but you're taking people at their word. And here's this high-level Scientologist saying, oh, no, we don't have that. And you go, oh, well, I haven't seen it, so it must not be here. And it's all over the place in that literature. So it's kind of funny, you know?
But I think there's also a little bit of sweet ignorance in there, in that part of me was thinking, well, I've not seen it, and I wouldn't have seen it if it was there because I didn't reach that level. But part of me was thinking, well, look, if it is there and that is what the teachings are, well, so what? Like, people can believe in whatever they want to believe in. And,
Sure.
you know, I haven't seen those documents, and yes, I'm a part of the church. And if they one day show them to me and tell me this is it, well, then I'll make my decision as to whether or not I believe in that or not. But, you know, I just kind of had an open mind and thought, well, even if they do believe in aliens and, you know, galactic warlords and dropping H-bombs in volcanoes, you know, sounds whack. I don't believe that. But if they do, oh well. I think the thing that was important to me at the time was this group of people in this church were genuinely, I think this is one thing that's not stated enough about Scientology, particularly in the UK. The vast majority of Scientologists are genuinely good people, right? I think the majority of people, especially in London org, want to help people, right? The thing is, they think the best way of helping people is through Scientology, because however you want to interpret it, the brainwashing or whatever, the indoctrination, for whatever reason, they believe Scientology is the best way to help humankind and help people live better lives. And that's all they want to do. And I think that was what got it for me. I was thinking, well, look, if they do believe in crazy stuff and there's all this stuff going on and rumors flying around, what's important is actually these people that I spend all day, every day with working, we're just here trying to make the world a better place. So what if some of them believe in weird alien stories? You know, the important thing is that we're clearing the planet, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not even doing that. Well, let's carry on with your narrative then. So basically we left off, you went in there, did personality test, got signed up, thought this was interesting stuff. How old are you at this point back then?
So I was probably about 16, I would say, because I'd finished school. Because I remember you finished school here in sort of like, you know, May or June or something. And then in the UK, it's a bit different to the US. So in the UK, you finish school at 16. And then you have the option to do another 2 years in college or sixth form, which is your A levels, which is an optional thing. And then after that, when you turn 18, you go to university, which is slightly different to what you guys call college. So,
right.
You know, I finished school at 16 in May or June or whatever. And then as soon as I finished school, they were like, great, well, look, you've got all this time on your hands now. Come and join staff. Great. Okay. So I joined staff and worked in the church over the summer. Now, I was meant to go back to school to do my sixth form college 2 years in the September. And when I signed up with staff, I said to them, look, my plan is to go to university and get a degree and then figure out what I want to do. You know, if I end up, you know, joining staff afterwards, fine. I'm happy to join staff now, but I'm joining it with you guys knowing I will have to leave in September unless somehow we make it work that I don't need to go to university or whatever, but I'd like to do that. And they were like, okay, yeah, that's fine, no problem. So joined staff and worked full time over the summer at the age of 16. I was really interested in law at the time. I initially wanted to do history and law at university. So I wanted to join OSA, which is the Office of Special Affairs, which is the dirty tricks part of the church that we see so much or hear so much about. But part of their sort of their division is the legal section. And I went in there going, look, I'm interested in law. I'd love to be involved in some of the legal cases and, you know, learning from that. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. But ended up, once they do your kind of assessments to figure out where you're best placed in the church, they were like, no, we think you're going to be good in Div 6, public facing, So I wasn't director of public book sales straight away. I was underneath someone else who was in that post, and did that for several months. And then it came to the end of the few months, and my mum and dad and family are not Scientologists. And obviously the expectation is that you finish your schooling before you go and do any sort of work or anything like that. And there was this whole thing about handling my parents on Scientology. They weren't anti-Scientology, but they weren't too happy at the idea of their son leaving school early and joining this thing that has a bad reputation. So there was this whole story of how do we get, particularly my mum, to a place where she doesn't have to be a Scientologist, but she has to be accepting of this being something that I want to do, and that I've decided I don't want to go to uni anymore and I want to continue on staff. And that was a lot harder than, they, I reckon, thought it would be. And long story short, the big event happens in October every year called the IAS event, the International Association of Scientologists. It's a big yearly celebration of everything Scientology do. And the idea was that we would bring my mum along to that event to show her more about Scientology, to show her all the good work that we're doing. And, that would be a good way of introducing her and making her feel okay with me doing this.
And was this going to be the live event at St. Hill that you all were going to, or was this going to be the televised one in London?
No, the live event. Because St. Hill is only an hour or two south of London, pretty much everyone that works at London Org lives in East Grinstead.
Wow.
Because it's only an hour or so on the train, and you can get the train straight from East Grinstead through to Blackfriars, which is the nearest station to London Org. So most people travel up from EG through right up to London and do their work, and then go back at the end of the day and then study at St. Hill in the evening, and then go home.
I was not aware. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's only an hour or so away. Most people live and study at St. Hill, do all their training and processing there, just come to London Org to work. And I was the exception because I lived in London. So with the IAS event, everyone goes to it in person because it's, only down the road. And then a day or two later, we would then hold an event in the org to show the public the video of it. So the idea was to bring my mum to the actual event. Now, my mum also, me.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you real fast. I don't think we've defined this. Let me let everybody know. This is a big deal, this gathering, this event that we're talking about here. It's the IAS, is the International Association of Scientologists. It's the membership collective of Scientology, and there are levels of membership based on how much money you're giving them. I think minimum is like 5,000 or something, but there's different levels of this. And this yearly celebration is where Miscavige will come out on stage and brief on all the things that have been happening during the year and how the IAS is leading the charge to clear the planet, to make a Scientology world. And it's a no-holds-barred kind of pull-no-punches sort of event in terms of straight Scientology being delivered directly to you. This isn't the sort of thing that they would want televised. And in fact, that infamous Tom Cruise turtleneck video where he's wearing a turtleneck sweater and going on at a mad rate, sounding like a complete lunatic, that's a clip from a video shown at an IAS event back in 2004. So these are big deal events. And when you first told me this before the show here, I was like, wow, your mom was going to this? That's okay. Let's see what happens. So it was kind of, it's not generally a raw
intense event. Yeah, it's a big intense event of like lots of lights and videos and look how great we are, and look, we've opened a new ideal org in this city, and this city we've got this letter from the mayor telling them how good we are, and look at how many people we've helped with getting off drugs. And it's really kind of like high intensity, happiness, like look at how great we are event. They actually they do it because St. Hill isn't big enough to hold the event. They hire a massive tent that they put in the garden. I believe at the time it was the largest tent in Europe. I remember that being a thing that they kept they kept sort of telling me about, an interesting thing about how great we are and how good Scientology is, that we hold this event where the only thing big enough to hold all the Scientologists, we have to rent the largest stretch tent in Europe, which I've actually since been in, going to festivals, like music festivals, because it's a tent they hire from a company and they use it as like a stage at festivals. So it's quite funny, often being at music festivals, standing in his tent going, if only people knew 6 months ago 5,000 or 10,000 Scientologists were standing under this, like with lights and yeah. But no, yeah, you're right. It's a really intense event that's really theta, very happy. And I think for someone like my mum who wasn't a Scientologist, it probably wouldn't have been the best first introduction to Scientology, because it would have been quite overwhelming and intense. So it's probably a good thing that we ended up not going in the end. But yeah, that was the handling of like how to get.
Yeah, you just said so you guys didn't go. So what happened? If this was the big handling to handle your mom, what fell through?
So just like any parent, my mum was, hearing about her son getting involved in this controversial religion and church. So she was doing her own research. And I'll have to ask her. I don't actually know the story because it was a while ago. But from what I remember, she was just asking, friends and family, what do you think about Scientology? And I think it was something like a friend of a friend, has a colleague who was disconnected or something, right? So a very distant thing. And basically it was like, do you want me to set you up with a meeting so you can talk to them and find out their story? And I think my mom was like, yeah, that would be interesting. That's the extent of it. Never actually, as far as I know, met with this person. And doesn't know anything about this. I don't know the story. I don't think she did. I think it was just more of a asking around to find out more information. And this person came up and said, oh, I think I know someone that was involved. But that was enough in Scientology's mind to bar myself and my mum from Scientology events, saying, you are connected to an anti-Scientologist and we can't risk it, and we don't want you coming to the event because you might cause trouble or whatever. You're potentially connected to a suppressive person, an enemy of the church. It's all very dramatic, and it was all done the night before. My mum had booked the day off work. I'd booked the day off school, because I was back at school at that point, to go and do this thing. And the night before, I got a call from the director of OSA, Mark Pinchin, who won't mind me dropping his name because he's publicly out there as a Scientologist. He called me up and said, look, sorry, you can't come because you've told us that your mum has spoken to someone who's spoken to someone who knows someone who 5 years ago had an issue or whatever it was. And because of that, you can't come. And so I was then kicked off lines. I was told, you can't come to the IS event. You can't come into the church. You can't do any courses, because I'd left staff at that point to go back to school because we hadn't got to that point of handling my mum to be okay with me not going to school. So I was back at school, but still doing courses and, still as a public in the org. And they basically said, because there's connection, that's it. You can't do it anymore. See you later. Bye. And was effectively cut off from everything and said, see you later. Bye. And so I just focused on my school and didn't do any Scientology for a year or so.
What was so you had been there by this point, because the IS event is in October, I think. So
I would have been on staff for like 6 months or something.
And how were you getting along with everybody there? How did they like you? How did you like them? Was this a shock to you that suddenly, because you're 5 degrees of separation from some rando SP who has something bad to say about Scientology, now we can't have you even on location here? Like, what were your thoughts about that?
I think if there's one thing I miss about Scientology, it's the people. It's the friends and the friendships and getting on with everyone and having this united cause to do something together to help save the planet or whatever. And that's the thing that hit me hardest at that time. Was I had all these friends, the director of public book sales who was above me at the time, and all of the Div 6ers. We would go out every week and go book selling, and we would be in the church. We would spend lots of time together, and we would get on really well and hang out and all this. And so I think the thing that upset me the most at this point was, okay, cool. Well, there's whatever policy thing going on. I don't understand it. But they would stop replying to my texts and had no communication with me whatsoever. And that really cut me up for a while of kind of, I was beaten up about, hold on, not only are you saying that I can't come into the church and do services, but now you're not my friend anymore. And it made me question like how genuine those friendships really are in the first place, if you can just drop them like that, So I went through a process over a year of kind of getting a bit, not anti-Scientology, but a bit, pissed off and like, well, I don't need you anyway. If, it wasn't really a true friendship, if you're just going to drop me like that, oh, well, I'm better off without you. And then coming to terms with it in my mind. And for whatever reason, no idea, but timing was perfect. I was kind of in the state of mind of thinking maybe enough time has passed that, wounds are healed. Maybe I should get back in touch and see if there's a way I can get back on church lines and doing services again. Because I did enjoy being around those people and, learning stuff, and it was fun. And it was about the time I was having those thoughts that Flag, which is the Florida-based headquarters of Scientology in Clearwater, happened to get in touch with me over the phone, I think it was. It was literally just a book read. So someone who is in the Sea Org that is trying to sell books to people and get people, to buy their basics. So sorry, I'm saying lots of little terms here. In Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard wrote lots of books, and we call it the basics books package and books and lectures. So you can spend a couple of £1,000s on getting every book and every lecture that he ever gave as a package of, documents that you can then study through.
Yeah.
And now, so
let me correct one thing you said there real fast. These are minutia points, tiny little thing really, but the basics books and lectures and all the material that's available right now is actually only a fraction of the total work that L. Ron Hubbard did. They haven't released all the lectures that he gave, but there is a tremendous amount of stuff there. And they have, and as you mentioned, this was a whole repackaging that was done back in 2004.
Yeah, it's kind of like, this is what Scientology is. You buy the basics books and lectures, read them, listen to them all, and you'll understand it. Yep. That's not the materials that make you go clear, and it's not the technical bulletins and all that sort of stuff. It is just like the books that you can buy and read and the lectures you can listen to that takes you on the journey of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and his research and all of that. So anyway, got picked up on a phone call from someone at Flag who was basically trying to sell me these books. And I kind of mentioned, actually, I'm not going to spend all this money with you. I'm a teenager. I don't have that money. And also, I'm pissed off at you guys because of what happened a year ago or whatever it was. And this girl who was at Flag, who I'd never met, who's in the Sea Org, she just wanted to sell me books. But she ended up being really heavily involved in getting me back in to the church because I told her the story and she was like, that doesn't sound right. Like, that doesn't sound like how Scientology is meant to be, done. It doesn't sound like ethics and policies are being followed here. And essentially got me to the place where I got back in touch with the org, and there was an investigation, which is called a board of review, where I wrote a report and said, this is what happened, and I'm really pissed off. Some people in London org got together and reviewed the situation and, wrote a review that said, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done this. It was right for Alex to not have come to the IS event because at the time we thought there was a connection, and for the protection of the group, we don't want someone to come to the event that's a potential enemy. However, it wasn't right that he should be barred from doing services and coming into the org and all of this stuff. So I think that's the first time I've ever actually heard of someone saying about Scientology admitting a mistake of kicking someone out when they shouldn't have been. Have you heard of anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I used to do that all the time.
Really?
Because what you're describing is what's called a recovery cycle.
Right.
And it's a thing that is done in Scientology to bring, lapsed parishioners, if you will, former members back into the fold. And this is a frequent activity of Scientology. They are constantly working their lists of people who have come in and done services in the past, even have money still on account
Mm.
in the church's bank accounts. The church has long since spent that money, but it's credited on their account in the church. And people leave that money there. They don't get a refund because the church doesn't easily give them. And they just kind of write it off as a bad investment or bad, thing or whatever. And then I would come knocking, hi, you were in Scientology a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. And I have stood on the doorstep of many former Scientologists and done my level best to explain to them, get from them why they got involved, what was the hope and dream they had, and then I was trained to, resuscitate that purpose, that goal that they had. And if I could do that successfully and convince them that Scientology could still produce that for them, I could get them down to the church. And often part of that was a recognition that they'd been screwed over somehow. That's why they left in the first place for the most part. Somebody screwed them over. They got charged too much. They even had, their credit card charged when it shouldn't have been, or they couldn't come back because of some arbitrary rule, like is what happened with you. No, just get out of here. We just don't want you here, kind of this kind of nonsense. And so my job as an individual was to acknowledge that wrongness, but I could never put it on the church as a whole. It wasn't, Scientology was wrong for doing this. Our policies were wrong. That could never be said. What was said, and similar to what was told to you, is, somebody must have screwed this up. Some individual made a bad choice or did something wrong. That was an error. That's not what our policies actually say. Let's get you back in here and get this corrected. And that's generally how I would get people back in. And it sounds like that's how they got you back.
Yeah, and that's how you separate the upset. It's not that Scientology is bad. It's not that Scientology kicked you out and told everyone to stop speaking to you or whatever. It's that someone didn't do it right. Scientology is fine and good. And, this recovery cycle thing works. This lady I was speaking to on the phone every week who was, trying to get me back on lines in London, but she was based in Flag and never met her. She was just trying to sell me books, but this long process ended up getting me to the place where I was when I was on staff, in that I was fully indoctrinated and believing that Scientology is the way to clear the planet and to help save humanity. And, I signed my Sea Org contract, right? Before I'd even gone back into London Org after being kicked out, I was still in that recovery process of trying to got back into the church. And I signed my Sea Org contract, which is, for those who don't know, a 1 billion year contract that you sign where you're basically signing your life up to dedicate it to Scientology, kind of like a monk or a nun, in that they give their whole life to Scientology, to the church. It'd be the same as Scientology. And so I signed that, and I was fully ready and gung-ho about it. And let's do this. Let's change the planet. And there's been a bit of an upset with London Org, but that's because someone there's not doing it right. I still believe in Scientology, and I was doing extension courses. So I was studying my books and my basics and everything with Flag online from home. It just kind of all made sense and fell into place, I suppose. So I was raring to go.
How interesting. Let me ask you, at this point, with you signing a Sea Org contract, which is an incredible commitment, especially for a relatively new Scientologist, generally speaking, we would go after and try to recruit people who were already pretty involved Scientologists. Rare, it happened, often enough, but rare to go after a fresh new person, and very rare to try to recruit somebody into the Sea Org who's mid a recovery. That's incredible to me. I can think of only a handful of times I've ever heard or seen of anything like that. What was it about Scientology itself and what you had been exposed to at this point or by this time, beyond the community, because the community kicked you out? I mean, you weren't part of London Org in that community anymore. So what was still hooking you? What was it that you were still no, this is it?
All I can say is that whoever that lady was I was speaking to on the phone, if she's still in, if she's left the Sea Org, she better be in a sales job, and I bet she's doing a really good job in it. If she does ever leave, you know who you are if you're watching this. If you do leave, go and get a sales job, because you'll be a multimillionaire within years, because you managed to do the impossible. No, I think, it's hard to answer that question, because, like I said, I didn't really have a ruin. It wasn't like I had some problem talking to people or communicating or whatever, and I went and did a course and it changed my life. Like, for me, it was just more the idea of the world being a messed up place, and this is a way to solve that and to help, people live a better life. And I think it was just that mission of, I think what got me was definitely the ego thing, because when you're in the Sea Org, or on staff as well, you're kind of under the impression that Scientology is the way to clear the planet and to save humanity. So you're therefore more important, and you have this special technology that you can use to save the world. And that makes you feel special. It makes you feel, important. And I think that's what kind of was the driver for me, was like, well, I'm involved in something here that's going to make a difference and going to make an impact, and I'm going to help people by doing this. And I think that's what really got me going. And the whole idea of living multiple lives and millions of years, reincarnation, all this sort of thing, the few years you have on planet Earth here as a human being, so what if you spend that working for a church and not working in a company or something, because you're actually helping save the planet. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Even though I was kind of fresh and didn't have too much Scientology knowledge, I'd probably read half of the basics, so I had a good understanding, but not much bridge work at that time. I think it was just the idea of, there's something to this, and I've seen it help other people. I've seen people in the org going in, doing services, coming out and being helped by it. So I think that's what it was.
Interesting. Well, fair enough. I mean, it makes sense. There was a point of something you said there that I wanted to highlight for a second, and that is that there's a term called love bombing. This is a common recruitment tactic or recovery tactic for destructive cults or for sales. I mean, really, it works outside of cults. It's ego boosting. It's a matter of telling people things, or insinuating or inserting things into the conversation that are designed to make the person you're talking to feel significantly better about themselves and their situation, and being part of this activity, whether it's buying this product or joining this group or both, or whatever it is they're trying to get you to do. And love bombing sounds like, and often is, a very gratuitous activity. It can be, 20 people come into the room and are just like, oh, you're so awesome for doing this. Yes, this is the thing to do. And they really get you all riled up. Now, that's a pretty extreme way of going about it. A much more subtle way of doing it, which it sounds like she was doing with you, is just throwing these comments in, and this sort of course, this is the most important group in the world. And of course, you recognize that because you're such a special person or special being. You're one of the few upper percentage of the upper percentage who can actually see the truth of the world and how screwed up it is. Most people just wander around in life like zombies, and they don't see anything. They don't hear anything. They just go about their stupid little lives and go watch the telly and go home and eat their little food and hope that their life isn't too miserable before they kick off. But you see something different. You see something special, and you are therefore somebody special. And that's why you're here in Scientology. This kind of talk is maybe not word for word what they did with you, but I certainly did this, and I certainly experienced it. And, and this is also love bombing.
And she would read out and send me bits of policies that, as a previous staff member and as a public Scientologist, I didn't have privy to. I didn't know anything about these.
There it is.
But she would give me little snippets of quotes from policies and bulletins that LRH, L. Ron Hubbard, had written that are only available to Sea Org members, those who have dedicated their lives to Scientology. And I think a lot of them come from the EPF, right, which is the what you do when you first become a Sea Org member, and it's the training indoctrination part of that process, right?
Correct.
I think it comes from a lot of the training there, because there's a lot of kind of, I remember her telling me and reading me quotes about how, you know, the Sea Org are, like you say, the upper percentile of the upper percentile, and you know, we're here to do very important work, and Sea Org members should be treated like royalty because they're on a mission, they're doing something really important. And if a Sea Org member goes into an org and says something, it needs to be done. Like, we're focused, we're doing important things. And yeah, she would give me these little snippets of like, see, look, this is what life is like in the Sea Org, and this is why it's important. And I think this is what made you want to join staff, is because you see there's something here to this, you know, technology, and joining the Sea Org is the best way of getting it to as many people as possible. And you know, I initially said that I wanted to get into like film and golden era productions. I remember seeing all the TV ads and the stuff that they did at Super Bowl, and just really wowed by the production of them, you know, and thinking that's really cool. I'd love to get involved in that. And, you know, how do I join gold? How do I be a creative person making movies and films and music and doing creative stuff day in, day out, and at the same time helping the planet? Well, you could join a Sea Org. We can move you to gold, and then you'll be doing creative stuff every day. And every bit of creative work you're doing is helping clear the planet. Like, for me as a teenager, I'm like, great, let's do it. I don't need to earn money. If you're going to pay for my housing and pay for my food and everything I need, and I'm going to live in America, which I'd never been to at that point, and I liked the idea of going to America, you know, they sold you this dream. And I was like, cool, let's do it. Like, game on. Sounds great. Sign me up. So I did.
Exactly. Well, you know, an awful lot of what you just said was what enticed me into the Sea Org at 25 years old. After doing staff for 8 years and feeling like my head was, you know, caving in from banging it against the wall all the time because we weren't getting anywhere. You know, in Santa Barbara, it was the same, you know, tiny little place, struggling year after year after year, despite all the work I was doing, and the other, you know, small number of staff who were there were doing. So I totally get it. Totally get it. And it's really empowering, isn't it? When you feel like you're doing something so special and incredible that no one else is really doing.
I think also as a teenager, you know, I was always quite a mature person as a kid growing up anyway. I was always like more mature than, you know, other kids, and, you know, would have adult conversations younger than most other people. And because of that, I kind of had an air of like, I want people to take me seriously as an adult and not treat me like a kid. And here I am being offered this chance to do a really important job. You know, it's stroking the ego, and it's making you feel important. And when I eventually, so just in terms of timeline here, I signed my SEAL contract, and then there was this board of review thing go on that we mentioned earlier. And then I joined staff again at London Org as a kind of stepping stone to then get me into the Sea Org full time, because I'd finished school at this point. And I remember going into this, you know, going into the org again as a staff member a couple of years later, having read loads more Scientology and Dianetics and knowing a lot more about it now, reading policies and all of this, and having been through this process. I remember going in and being like, right, I'm here, I'm going to make a difference. Like, let's do this. And one of the first things I did was send a TEDx to David Miscavige, chairman of the board, right? Which,
oops,
I know you'd laugh about this.
I think this is actually hilarious, because
it just shows how gung-ho I was, right?
Yes.
I was a teenager, right?
Yes.
And it just shows how much I thought I was doing the best thing ever, right?
Yeah. It's like writing the CEO. It's like writing the top of the top and going, I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome. It's going to be incredible. And they didn't really share your joy in that communication, did they?
Essentially, I was new. So this is when the second time I joined staff, I was then put into the position of director of public book sales because the person doing it before had actually joined the SEAL, so she wasn't in that post anymore. Down at St. Hill, she was now. So yeah, I was doing public book sales, and I was doing my staff statuses, this training, and part of it is the non-existence formula, right? Which is, how, part of it is making people aware that you're now doing this job, right? You're now and taking ownership of your job in the church.
Yeah.
And me being young and enthusiastic, I was like, well, great, I've signed my SEAL contract. I'm in this post, right? I'm going to send a message to David Miscavige, like you say, like the CEO or the top level person in this multinational company, and say, I think it was just a very short message that essentially just said, hi, I'm the new director of public book sales at London. I've signed my SEAL contract. I'm ready to go. I wanted you to know that I'm here doing it, and whatever you need, let me know. I'm here to make the world a better place, and I'm going to put London on the map, right? It was something along those lines, which they didn't like.
Exactly. Now, what were you told? What happened there? Because it's a completely innocuous, sincere message from a new eager beaver staff member. What the hell could be wrong with that?
Imagine like you are a CEO of your own company, and you get this new intern start, and they send you an email saying, hi, I'm the new intern, I want to help. Most people would be like, oh, that's great. Yep. Cool. Yeah, amazing. Here's how you can help, or good to meet you, or whatever. I didn't get a response, didn't get anything. I heard nothing back from it whatsoever until several months later when I was kicked out of the church for the second time, which is when it was then thrown in as part of the ammunition. And they were basically saying, oh, yeah, there were reports written about the fact that you TEDx COB, which is not something that you should do. It didn't get to him, but it got to his PA or something. And apparently it was, we got in trouble because of it.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know until
much later.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And it's interesting also because you alluded there to a very important word in Scientology, which is the word reports. Mm-hmm. Reports were received. Reports were written. People got in trouble. This is a briefest of glimpse into the Scientology ethics and justice apparatus. And the reporting system in Scientology is extensive. You learn about it when you're doing your staff status, initial training as a staff member, that there's something on the order of 20 different kinds of reports that you can write, from a damage report to what's called a knowledge report, which is the most common one, to a technical alter is report where somebody's screwed up some technical procedure, and and they have to have a specific report for that kind of behavior. So it's an extensive system of reporting in Scientology. Only because I'm curious, and we're kind of bouncing on the narrative and then off the narrative. Since we're talking about this, as a new green, coming into the system, kind of getting into this, did you ever have any thoughts or ideas about that system?
I loved a report, me. I wrote so many reports. I think this is the thing that it's taken me a long time. We'll talk about this a bit more later, but it's taken me a long time to kind of come to terms with my time in Scientology and the impact it had on me mentally and so on. And this is just a real example of writing reports on people and things that haven't been done right. The concept kind of makes sense, right? If you're doing something at work and you see someone not doing it right, say to them, hey, do you notice if you try it this way, it might be better? Great. That concept makes sense. However, when it's a report in the way that it is in Scientology, it's you're writing reports on every little thing that you see that's wrong or out ethics, or, you see someone having a risky conversation with someone or whatever. You're basically telling on people, right? You're snitching on everyone about everything, which is a really horrible thing to do. And at the time, you don't realize that. At the time, I was like, oh yeah, report, let's do it. I would write reports about everything, because for me, I'm like, well, look, L. Ron Hubbard says it's meant to be this way. So my favorite was the things that shouldn't be report, which basically says, this is how LRH says it's meant to be in the policy. And I saw it not being done by the policy. So there we go. I would do that all the time, because I was learning all of these policies as I was doing my studies, and I would see things that weren't being done right. And having had the kind of trauma of being kicked out previously and them admitting it's because someone didn't apply tech correctly, then I was kind of almost had an eye out for it. I was looking for things that weren't being done properly, because it really upset me, and I wanted to make sure it didn't upset anyone else. I didn't want anyone else to go through what I went through, having been kicked out, losing all of my friends, losing my purpose of like wanting to help people and all of that, because I was so invested. I was really beaten up about it. I didn't want anyone to go through that. So I was really focused on writing as many reports as I could on things that I saw that weren't right, so that they could be fixed.
Right. Right. And if that's as far as the system went, is so they could be fixed, maybe we'd have something useful, but of course it's much darker than that, as they brought this stuff up later. And you never saw any of those reports until months later, when policy says you're actually supposed to see reports that are written on you. You're supposed to get a copy of them.
There were one or two reports that came through, like KRs, like knowledge reports and things that were written on me while I was working in the church. And I did see them, coming through the system, like one or two. But when I left, that's when they basically opened my ethics file and said, see, look, you've been doing this wrong. You've done this. This person said you've done this. This person saw you doing this. Here's all the ammunition. And that was like a bigger blow, because I didn't have any defense to it, because I didn't even know what the report said. They were just telling me what they've read.
Right. They didn't even show it to you. Yeah, I got that sort of treatment lots of times. Well, we've received reports, and you're like, can I see them? No. Well, then how am I supposed to respond? Well, that's why I'm talking to you right now.
And then I would write things that shouldn't be a report, because in policy it says if there's a report written about you, you should get a copy of it.
That's right.
So they would say, we've got a report about you. And I'd say, can I see it? You'd say no. So then I would write a report that saying you wouldn't show me the report.
I know. It's just, it becomes a bit of a circle jerk at the same time.
It's
all
crazy.
Right. Well, fair enough. So let's go back to the narrative now. So fine. So the Sea Org thing, but you don't actually arrive in the Sea Org because you go back to London and they welcome you with open arms?
Yeah, so we kind of did this border review thing, and I was, put on staff, and I said, I was going around, I'm like, look, I'm happy to be on staff. I'm glad I'm back, but I'm pissed off, right? Because you kicked me out. And so the solution was this border review, which they did. And I've got the letter still that says, we fucked up, sorry. And after that, I was kind of, I was still upset by it. I said, great, you've written here that you messed up, and, that's that. But that doesn't make me feel any better about it. I'm still annoyed, because I was at this point as a teenager of kind of moving from a school to a new school to starting on a staff and trying to find my way in life, and came across this group of people that had this purpose of things that they were trying to do, clear the planet. And, I gave my life to it. The whole summer I was working there day in, day out. So, it was everything to me. And then suddenly I was thrown out. So that really hurts, right? And so, yes, by saying you messed up and you shouldn't have kicked me out in the way you have, I'm still upset by it, because it was a big part of my life and my identity and what I thought was my purpose of, like, what am I doing with my life? Am I going to go to be a lawyer or study art or whatever? My purpose was to do Scientology. And so to not be able to do that anymore, it's upsetting. So anyway, told them that, and basically it was like, well, great, we need to fix this. And so they, came up with some sort of program, and I did lots of sort of not bridge work, but auditing on the meter. I don't know what type or anything. I could probably find out somehow, but basically went into session for several hours a day for several days over the course of a week or two, obviously I was on staff, so I didn't have to pay for any of this because it's all free when you're on staff. But we just had a load of auditors come over from Flag, having done training for GAT2, Gold Major Tech 2, which we can talk about later for those who don't know. But basically, it's really highly trained auditors that came back to London Org. So I was having the best of the best auditing. And auditing is this cancelling session where you use the e-meter. And the idea is it helps locate sources of tension and trouble in your life. And so I went into session and I was like, look, I'm pissed off because you guys have hurt me. You know, there was this thing called ARC break. You know, in Scientology, they believe in affinity, reality, communication. And so the more you talk to someone, the more you find things to agree with them about, the reality, and the more affection you have for them, the affinity. And it all kind of works in tandem. And so they were basically saying, I'm ARC broken, right? I've had an upset with the church because I was ceased communicating. My reality, my agreement and belief in the system was broken because it was not applied correctly. And yeah, so I had to do some sessions to kind of help that. And at the same time, I was reading Self-Analysis, I think it was, which is one of L. Ron Hubbard's books. And I think it was in there that it says something like, when you go into a session, the idea is the session makes you feel better. You're not allowed to leave an auditing session until you've increased on the tone level, on your tone scale, right? Yep. And I came out of a session upset. I was crying. And I was like, I went in to see the examiner afterwards, who is the one who sort of checks off how well the session went and all of that. And they were like, how do you feel? I said, I feel worse. I felt pissed off and annoyed at the church. Now I've gone into this auditing session and I feel even more upset. I feel, you know, worse than I did before, and wrote a report about it. You're meant to go into a session that's meant to make you feel better. And something's not right here. It's happening again, right? Where things weren't being applied how they were meant to be applied. That's how I got kicked out the first time. So I kicked up a fuss of like, I can see things not being done correctly here again, and I don't want, and I got really kind of focused on it because, you know, I wanted LRH tech to be applied correctly, because if you apply it correctly, that's how you clear the planet and save everyone, and that's the answer, right? But that's how much it's in your head, right? In that I'm upset with the church, but actually what I'm upset with is the fact that they're not doing L. Ron Hubbard policies correctly, because I genuinely thought that that is the answer. That's what will make me feel better, and that's what will solve the problem, right? Is by applying tech.
Right. And that's the trap. That's the trap that everybody falls in with Scientology. And it is a carefully laid trap, by the way. It sounds perfectly reasonable. I'm telling you, this is really interesting because I want to point something out here about Scientology. And this is one of the things where Scientology truly is different from these other groups that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, or any other group, really. I mean, other than other destructive cults. And the point here is, you have a system in place that appears to work. It appears to make sense. Oh, we write these reports, we have this org board, we have these statistics, we have all this stuff people do, and it's all very interesting, and it's all this integrated whole, and it looks like it's going to work beautifully. And if you just do it, and if everybody does it right, you can't help but expand. It's inevitable. If everybody's on the same page and doing all of this properly, expansion is assured. In fact, the only reason, and the logic used is, the only reason we're not expanding, the only reason that there's ever any trouble, is because people aren't doing this properly. So if that's not happening, somebody's screwing up, or some series of people are screwing up, and we need to fix that. And what that actually does is put you in a witch hunt mentality all the time, because you're constantly looking for the people who are screwing up, because the system doesn't produce the expansion it promises. It's constantly over-promising and never delivering. And because it doesn't deliver, because the system itself doesn't work, even though it appears like it should, there are so many carefully laid landmines in the system that are integral to its operation that you can't get past or around or avoid, like the ethics section, like the fair gaming, like some of these other things that happen, the week-to-week madness of statistics being driven on a weekly basis. This is part of the system. You can't get away from it. And these are the things that make the system not work, make it completely unworkable. But this part of the system is, if it's not working, it's on you, not the system. So you end up in a headspace. This is called a double bind. This is one of these crazy things where you're told one thing and you believe it must be true, but then here's all this stuff happening that makes it not true, but it must be true, but it can't be true, but it must be true, but it can't be true. And that's crazy making. And that's the situation that so many staff get into. And you, as this wonderful new naive staff member, oh, but this all makes sense. This all works. This is all how it's supposed to be. And I'm going to write up these reports about how it's not working. Well, then what happened?
Exactly. The thing is, it's all very logical. Like Scientology isn't, this is something that was described to me when I first joined. It was like, if you go to a Christian church, right, there's the Bible as their main text of belief, right? And there's an element of faith. You have to believe in it or you don't believe in it, and you take what you believe and take what you don't believe. In Scientology, there's no one standing there saying, here's our book of scripture, you either believe it or don't. And you don't, there's no act of faith. It's all policies and ideas and, techniques and things, try doing this and you'll see that it works. So it's all very kind of fact-based in that, it's try this, use this tool and you'll see that it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? What's true for you is true for you. Genuine quote. So there's no one telling you to believe in this or not believe in this. So you get in this mindset of everything L. Ron Hubbard wrote, if it's done right, will work because every little bit that you do read makes logical sense in your mind.
Yep.
If this happens, then this happens, or this is happening because of this. Well, yeah, that makes sense. So when you get upset with the church, it's because your instinct isn't, well, maybe that's because what L. Ron Hubbard wrote is a load of rubbish and he just made it up and he has no credibility and he's not a scientist and all the other things he says he was. He's just making it up. That's not in your head. Your head is, well, it's not being done like he said it should be. And that's right. The problem.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it messes you up over time because, having been out of the church for 6 or 8 years or something like that now, I'm still realizing the impact it has in the way your brain thinks and, engages with people. And, a conversation doesn't work the way that you get taught in Scientology, of it being A, B, reach and withdraw, like a scientific formula of how a conversation happens. Conversations are natural. There's not the science or maths behind it. Like, it's just a chat with someone. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. As we can see in hindsight, it becomes a lot clearer. The fuzziness develops, and you can sort of see things more clearly once you get outside of the system. And that's the deceptive nature of it, is you believe so wholeheartedly this thing must work. Look at all these people. Look at all this writing. Look at all these descriptions of this. This simply must work. It makes logical sense. It only makes logical sense because of the way that it was described to you, as opposed to what the reality of the system is. And the reality of it is that this is an authoritarian system that is designed to control you. Mm-hmm. But the wording is so good. This is where L. Ron Hubbard really shined, is the writing and the descriptions of things and the way and the systems that were designed to that again appear to make sense, until you start really asking the hard questions. And then the system is designed to do exactly what it did to you. So let's go ahead and get to that, because you wrote these reports, getting these auditing, trying to make this work. You're not happy with it. You're writing reports about it. What happened?
Yeah, so I was, it was a day of normal work as, director of public book sales, and was upset because I had this auditing session. I red tagged, which means, you're upset. So I went in the next day to another session to try and handle the upset. And yeah, basically I wrote to the CS, the case supervisor, the person who overlooks everyone's auditing files, and basically just explained that I'm annoyed and upset because and I remember writing this, I know and believe that Scientology works. I've seen it work, right? I've seen it help people. And still to this day, I'm not a follower of Scientology. I'm not a Scientologist, but I do believe it does help some people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people who genuinely do get helped by it. And that's a fact. And so I remember writing, I've seen people get helped by it. I've not been. I've been upset by it. And I want it to work for me. But right now, it isn't. And I don't know what to do, right? I think something's gone wrong or it's not being applied properly. But there's no point in doing, because I remember them saying, why don't you just quit? And I said, well, because I want it to work. If it didn't work, then I wouldn't be here. There'd be no point in carrying on in Scientology if I didn't believe it worked.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that I am is because I do, and I've seen it work. And I just think people need to do it properly, and people have not been applying it properly. And this ended up going back to the ethics section. And I remember halfway through the day, I was drawn into an interview, like a meeting in this tiny little room with the DIR, Director of Inspections and Reports, who also had just come back from Flag, I believe. So he was really highly trained. And therefore, in your mind, thinks, well, if anyone knows how to apply ethics properly, it's him, because he's been trained at the headquarters and he knows what to do. Sits down and basically says that the reason you've got this upset is because you've got overts and withholds, right? You've done something against the church or against yourself, or I don't know what it is. But you have to, kind of like a confessional in Catholicism, right? Get something off your chest. Again, the principle makes sense. If you're wound up about something or you're, upset with yourself, talking to people helps get it off your chest, right? Concept makes sense. But I hadn't done anything against the church, and I wasn't in the wrong. But I was basically given a piece of paper and said, you're not leaving this room until you write up all of the things that you've done wrong against the church. And once you do that, you'll feel much better, and the whole thing will blow over. But you're not allowed to leave the room until you do. And I was in tears at this point. Again, I was a teenager, never been locked in a room before. And I remember trying to get up to leave, and he put his handle on the door and he was like, no, I was not allowed to leave that room until I could come up with something that I had done wrong against the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely hadn't. I was absolutely fine. I think the thing I came up with is, so there's a cafe in the downstairs area of London Org, and it's kind of just run by staff. So there's a little fridge with snacks and drinks and stuff in it, and there's not enough staff for it to be staffed. So it's just a little tray. If you take a can of Coke, you just put some money in the tray. And I think the thing I ended up coming up with was, quite often when I get a can of Coke or a slice of cheese or whatever, I don't actually look at how much change I put in there. I just know that's probably about enough. I don't know how much they want for a thing. So, sometimes I might end up paying 50p for a can of Coke, and sometimes I might pay £1 for a can of Coke. But that means I've done something wrong, because those times that I've not paid the right amount, I'm stealing from the church. And that was the thing I came up with that was my wrong. Anyway, yeah. So basically, I wasn't allowed to leave until I did this OW write-up. And once I had, written something up and given it in, he said, thank you, literally didn't even look at it, and gave me another piece of paper, which was a source of trouble type D declare, which essentially means that I am a potential trouble source. I'm not a suppressive person, but I'm someone that just apparently tries to get free auditing and free, Scientology, and I don't believe in it. And, we'll see if we can get the report up on the screen now. I think that might be interesting for people to read. But yeah, so I was given this declare, and in the same piece of paper, the next piece of paper, same wad of documents, was my staff dismissal, saying you have to, leave staff now. I was escorted to my desk, where he stood there and waited for me to pack up my things, and escorted to the front door. And he said, see you later. And I was told that I'm not allowed to go to any church or do any services. And in order for me to go back to Scientology, I have a return program. So if I ever want to go back to Scientology, all I have to do is the entire basics, books, and lectures package as extension courses, which I worked out because I was interested. If I was to do every single course they want me to do full time, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take me 3.5 years.
There it is.
To be able to then walk into a church again.
Yeah.
So after that, I was really hurt and upset about it. And, I've gone through over the last years ups and downs of thinking, should I go back? I miss the people and all of this. And it's taken me a long time to come to terms with it and think, look, you don't get kicked out of a church twice and read all of these horror stories of abuses and things going on elsewhere. And,
that's right.
You don't go back to that.
No.
Because you realize that you're not the person that you actually are. I'm a completely different person now. I'm more myself now than I was then because I'm thinking for myself and thinking in my own way. So,
well, and that's the exact problem is that for then, right? Because I'll tell you, I mean, you were thinking too much for yourself then too. Too much, I'm exaggerating. I'm being sarcastic in saying that there is no such thing, but that's the entire point is you were not conforming and you were not going with the flow of the program. And so you were somebody who in Scientology, they have a term for this. It's called a flat ball bearing. You have ball bearings. They're supposed to be round. They're supposed to keep the machine going. And if you have a flat one in there, the machine breaks. And so Hubbard refers to people who break his system as flat ball bearings. And he also... I
remember being really annoyed about this when I was going through the process because all I was doing was writing reports about how things aren't being done right. Like I was applying the technology and that's what they didn't like, right? And I remember I went through this period of being really upset and annoyed about it, of like, how can you think of me like this when all I'm trying to do is what you're telling me to do and what LRH says. And, it takes time to get over that and just realize the whole thing's bollocks. But, when you're in that mindset, you just genuinely think you're doing the right thing.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. But let's go ahead and take a look at this policy really quickly, just so we're clear with people as to what it was that was used with you. It's a policy letter Hubbard wrote back in 1964. Called Policies on Physical Healing, Insanity, and Sources of Trouble. So if you're wondering what are the church's policies on healing or the healing arts and insanity and on what are called so-called sources of trouble, this is the policy. And I'm just going to read a little bit from this. Policies similar to those regarding physical illness and insanity exist for types of persons who have caused us considerable trouble. These persons can be grouped under sources of trouble, quote unquote. They include, now your was a type D, is that right?
Type D, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've ever heard the term A to J in Scientology, that's a term that's used in Scientology all the time. These are where it comes from. There's A, B, C, D, E, all the way up to J. Those are the different sources of trouble. So you will have a written piece of paper that labels you one of these sources of trouble, sometimes multiple. Sometimes you can have multiple. You can be a type A and a type D and a type F, but you just got D. And what is D? Check this out. Responsible for condition cases have been traced back to other causes for their condition too often to be acceptable. In other words, it's called a responsible for condition case. It's you guys are responsible for how I feel, and I feel like shit, and your auditing is causing me to feel like this, and I'm not okay with that. And Hubbard writes the entire thing off in one line. He says that the causes for that phenomenon have been traced back to other causes for their condition for this to be acceptable. In other words, we're never going to believe you when you tell us that we're the ones making you worse. That's a point of policy here. I'm not misinterpreting. This is exactly what happened with you. By responsible for condition cases is meant the person who insists a book or some auditor is wholly responsible for the terrible condition I am in. Such cases demand unusual favors, free auditing, tremendous efforts on the part of auditors. Review of these cases show that they were in the same or worse condition long before auditing, that they are using a planned campaign to obtain auditing for nothing, that they are not as bad off as they claim, and that their antagonism extends to anyone who seeks to help them, even their own families. That's type D. Oh, it didn't work on you? There's the door.
It's interesting because it's so not true. Like, you can see how someone reading that would kind of think, oh, that makes sense. But it doesn't, because
nope.
I was fully into Scientology, and I even wrote saying I wanted it to work for me, but it isn't working right now. Right. And he's right in what he says about responsible for conditions. I did say I felt shit because of this auditing session. It made me feel worse. That is true. But the thing is, he turns it into the only reason you're going to say that is because you're doing something wrong, or, you know, whatever. It's, well, no, it is true. I genuinely believed in Scientology. I signed my SEAL contract. I was ready to give my life to this thing, and that was my purpose and my meaning in my life. I wasn't just trying to get free auditing. I got free auditing because I was on staff, and I was told that that is what would make me feel better about being kicked out.
Exactly.
And this policy is in complete contradiction to the policy that I was saying about earlier, in that a session is meant to make you feel good, and bad auditing can make people feel worse, right? Technically, he says the only thing that will make auditing make someone feel worse or do damage is if it's not done correctly. So if it's not done correctly and it makes you feel worse, that's a different thing to someone saying, do you know what I mean? Like, it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
Saying if you say it doesn't work, it's a complete contradiction, because here he says it's because you're trying to get it for free. And in the other one, he says it's because it's not been done right.
That's right. And that's the bottom line with this is it always comes, this is what I'm talking about with these systemic issues, is here you have a legitimate, sincere effort to try to get Scientology to work for you, and you're reporting within its reporting system that it's not working, and their answer to that is, oh, well, it's you. It's your overts, it's your moral transgressions. You're just a responsible for case. You're just one of these guys who just wants everything for free, and it's always everybody else's fault, and that's your problem. And guess what? Our policy says, we don't want you around here. Get the hell out. Violating every single promise that you read in the materials that says Scientology is capable of handling anybody about anything. The reactive mind is a thing. We run out these engrams. Everybody's going to be great. You're going to get clear. You're going to get OT. Here's all these wonderful, overblown promises. You come in, you give of your time, you give of your money, you give of your effort, and they shit on you. They just say, oh, well, you know, you're not good enough for us, and there's the door, and get the hell out and never darken it again. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. That's the double bind I'm talking about. That's that, you know, this one thing is true, but then this other completely opposite thing is true at the same time. Well, they can't both be true, and trying to reconcile that is what drives people crazy. You know? And
I think that's where the real damage is that Scientology does. You know, we talked at the beginning about the abuses and things you hear about in the States, and there not being as many stories in the UK of that. So you think, well, maybe in the UK it's like tamer, or it's just not been done right in the US. But actually, when you look at the policies and what it actually is, what Scientology is at its core, that's where the abuse is, because it gets you into this mindset of feeling that, you know, you're this spiritual being with all this more power than you can ever imagine. You can change the world, and you're completely responsible for everything in your environment. That's a great feeling. It empowers you. Great. I feel empowered. I'm in control. But then when it's turned on the flip side by going, well, you're the reason that you're upset with the church. It's not because we kicked you out, right? And yeah, that's upset you, but it's your fault that you're upset by that. That's where the damage and the abuse is. And you don't realize it at the time. And it's taken me 6-8 years to really come to terms with it and realize how that affects you mentally in the brain, because you spend so many hours day in, day out doing all this training and auditing and things, learning that your reactive mind, your emotions, your emotional self is something you want to get rid of because it gets in the way, right? And so you get into this mindset of like trying to push that away and think, no, I'm going to think rationally. And, I've only realized in the last year the impact that those sessions and that auditing and my time in Scientology has had on my way of thinking.
Right. Exactly. You just elucidated it perfectly. That's exactly the problem at the bottom of this is people get very, very interested in all the overt abuses and the fair gaming and stalking and all the salacious stuff that goes on in Scientology, but they miss the forest for the trees because it takes a deeper look to be able to see this and understand that the structure of what's going on in Scientology with every person going into it is exactly what you just said. It is a denial of the emotional center of a person. It's a denial of emotional intelligence of who a person actually is and their free will or their self-determinism. It's a compliance creating system. You go with what we tell you to do and look at how free you are, because the more we command you around and tell you what to do and the better you comply with it, the more free you are. It's crazy making. I can't stress that enough, and this is not harped on enough. But it is the opposite world that is Scientology. And so it's not just about the written works or Hubbard's, silly smile or broken teeth or, history of throwing people overboard ships. It's so much worse than that. It's so much more insidious. And the lingering effects of it are exactly what you've been dealing with for years, even with a short time of exposure, but a deep one. You went all in. Mm-hmm. Even with that little tiny bit of time, you have an outsized negative effect and consequence of that because it fucks with your head. I don't know any other way to put it, So
the thing is, you don't realize at the time, like I said earlier, the vast majority of Scientologists are genuine, nice people that genuinely want to help each other and make the world a better place. And there's an amount of accountability you have to have as well. My job was director of product book sales. I sold 200 books a week or something like that on occasion, and was responsible for every Dianetics that was sold in London and Malta. Strangely, that was one of our missions. Don't know why. Those are my territories, and so every book that was sold was my stat. And that's the way you get people into Scientology. So there is an element of coming to terms with the fact that there are inevitably people who are now Scientologists who are studying, who are in Scientology now because they bought a book during the time that I was selling them. So I'm responsible for that. And there's an element of coming to terms with it, but there's not an element too much of guilt because it's not like you did it. They don't do it intentionally to hurt people.
Right. That's right.
Right? No one is sitting, maybe David Miscavige today, but no one's sitting there in their church, chair, office, thinking, how can we manipulate these people and how can we rip them off and how can we extort them and how can we abuse them? No one's really, that's not the mindset of a Scientologist. The mindset of this is what L. Ron Hubbard says to do, and that is what will help this person. So I'm going to do that because that's the best thing to do.
Exactly.
And I think that's a differentiation that isn't made, enough.
No, fair enough. I think that the well-intentioned, the well-meaning of Scientologists it certainly should be acknowledged. It's just that in the same breath, we have to acknowledge that the path given to those people as to how you go about helping somebody creates actually it's there's no way to follow L. Ron Hubbard's policies and directives and methods and not be manipulative and not hurt people. There's no way to do it, quote unquote, right. There's no way to do it in a healthy way because of all the landmines that are built into it that are not obvious, that you become blind to in the course of doing it, and so they don't have to maliciously sit at their desks and plan on hurting people, but by the action of applying Scientology procedures, that pain and that abuse is inevitable. And that's what we mean by a systemically abusive system. Is you can't help but produce bad results. And yet, here are these people with the very best of intentions doing that. And that is pure awful. It's just, there's no other word, it's tragic. And unfortunately, this can become so ingrained in people, and they can become so sure that these methods and techniques are the right thing to do, that they even leave Scientology and continue practicing it outside the bounds of the church and think, oh, well, now I've gotten away from all the horrible stuff. No, you didn't. It's all horrible, but it takes some digging and it takes some real looking and education to see those things, and you're doing that hard work. And that's how we got in touch. And so that's very commendable. But it's hard. It is hard work, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, that's why I wanted to share my story, is because, the abuses and things you hear about going on in Scientology and the Sea Org in the US are undoubtedly bad. I'm not saying they're not in any way. They are, horrible things, but you don't hear as much of that happening in the UK. But for it to be abusive is not necessarily, I was locked in a room and told I couldn't leave until I'd written up what I'd done wrong. That wasn't what was traumatic. That didn't affect me too much. That's not a thing. The thing is that I, at that time, was upset when I got out of the room eventually. I genuinely thought that was the right thing for him to have done, because that's what LRH said. And I think I thanked him, because that's what, LRH says you have to do the OW write-up and then you'll feel better. So by keeping me there, he made sure that I did the OW write-up, and then supposedly I was meant to feel. So that's where the trauma is how much it gets into your head of the way that you think and the way that you process information. And that's the damage that it does,
that's right.
Long-term to people.
Exactly. Well, Alex, I'm going to move toward wrapping up, because we've been at it long enough now, and I think we've touched on some super important points here. Is there anything that we did not touch on that you feel we really need to get out there right now that you want to say?
I mean, I've got a ton of crazy stories written up here that we didn't get into, that I'll have to do a part 2 and share all these fun stories from my time on staff that will be entertaining, but nothing that's kind of important. I think the main thing, like I said, that I want to get out there is that, people who get sucked into Scientology, anyone can be a victim of Scientology. Anyone can, you don't have to be stupid or dumb or whatever like that. They're literally preying on people who aren't dumb or stupid, that do have a head on their shoulders. And,
that's right.
If anyone that's in Scientology, the best thing to do to help them is, what happened with me is just get you to start thinking about the reality of the policy. Does that make sense in your eyes? Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard says if you apply the technology, the world will be clear and it's all. But when you see the technology being applied, are you actually seeing the effect of that, or are you not? And with your own eyes, you can see, and things start to fall apart from that. So
there you go.
And if there's anyone out there that, is going through Scientology and wants to, I'm all ears if anyone wants to speak confidentially or whatever.
Great. Excellent.
Happy to help.
Well, thank you, Alex. And yeah, we're definitely going to do that second episode in the not too distant future, so we can go over some of those stories, because you gave me a little rundown on some of them, and I am very interested in hearing some of this. So I think that'll be it. I think that'll be a funner, maybe a little lighter episode, but that'll be fun. All right, man. Well, again, thank you very much. And folks out there, thank you very much for coming around and listening to us go on at a mad rate here about all of this. I hope that some of what we went into here was educational and informative, and not just not just entertaining, because that is really the point of this: is why is this group so awful? What is this all about? And why is it that I say, any member of Scientology is actively being coercively controlled and unduly influenced? Why do I say that when they're having a wonderful time, smiles, laughter, it's all great, can't throw enough money at the church? This is why, is because they don't realize what's being done to them yet. Sometimes it takes a while to wake up to this stuff. Fortunately, some people get the boot a little sooner than others. And so there you go. All right, folks, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.